This isn't ballet class. The head instructor's voice cut through the air like cold steel right before he swept Rachel Monroe's legs out from under her, slamming her to the mat with a heavy thud. Laughter broke out around the room. Phones were already up recording. On the pristine white mat, the ordinary-looking woman lay motionless for a second. "Women like you belong in yoga studios, not on these mats," he sneered, eyes gleaming with disdain. No one noticed her hands calloused steady. She quietly rose, said nothing. A military dog tag slipped from beneath her gi collar, catching the overhead lights for a moment. They had just made the biggest mistake of their day. What would you do if this happened to you? 1. Stand up, stay silent, and wait. 2. Speak up and show them who you are. Rachel Monroe woke up every day before the sun. Not because she had to, but because that's what the Marines had ingrained in her even 4 years after discharge. Her apartment in a working-class Boston neighborhood was modest bare walls, a second-hand couch, and a bookshelf filled with military history and medical texts. The silence in the early hours helped drown out the noise in her head. She brewed strong black coffee and stood by the window watching the city stretch itself awake. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. At the VA Rehabilitation Center, where she worked as a physical therapist, her presence was enough. She understood pain because she carried it. Under the sleeves of her hoodie was a scar that never fully healed, and under her steady posture was a woman trying to reclaim control without asking permission. She never told anyone she used to teach hand-to-hand combat in the military, and no one asked. Rachel's apartment was on the 3rd floor, dull, red brick walls so thin she could hear the television next door at night. But she didn't complain. Those sounds helped her escape the terrifying silence of her memories. Every morning after her usual cup of coffee, Rachel changes clothes and puts on her backpack, leaving home for the Jamaica Plain Veterans Rehabilitation Center, where she works as a physical therapist. Colleagues appreciate her calmness, efficiency, and uncanny ability to understand veterans with PTSD. No one knows she was once one of the Marines' top close combat instructors. She never told. No one asked. To them, she was just a nice, somewhat reserved woman who was good at her job. But Rachel's past was completely different. Rachel served 8 years in the Marine Corps working as a close combat instructor at Camp Pendleton. She doesn't like to talk about it, but those who studied with her remember her petite figure being able to defeat male soldiers 1.5 times her height with 3 neat movements. It all ended in Afghanistan. An explosion. Shrapnel lodged deep in her right shoulder. After 3 surgeries and 6 months of recovery, she was medically discharged, something she never fully accepted. The body heals, but the scars in the mind never go away. The marriage was falling apart. The husband who had loved her was now a stranger. "You have to stop living like you're still in the army," he said, and walked away, never looking back. And Rachel. She chose to stay silent and start over, alone. 6 months after her divorce, Rachel entered Apex Jiu-Jitsu Academy, a prestigious academy in upscale Boston. The place was shiny. The facilities were modern, and the tuition was so high that she had to cut back on spending and take on weekend jobs to make ends meet. The reason she chose this place was not because of the reputation, but because she needed a challenge, a way to retain the soldier in her before it was completely eroded by society. On the first day, the head coach, Blake Thompson, looked her up and down and coldly said, "We do have some women here, but this isn't cardio kickboxing." Rachel didn't react. She just nodded, paid the fee on the spot, and signed up for the basic class 3 times a week. She said nothing about the past. There was no need. Her silence was the beginning of everything that was about to happen. Rachel was not sociable, did not show off, did not make friends. She was always the first one to arrive and the first one to leave after each practice session. While other students struggled to learn how to keep their balance, Rachel absorbed the technique like instinct. She doesn't outsmart or teach anyone, but sometimes when you do a move wrong, she'll whisper a word of advice, short to the point. Blake began to notice. First, the longer-than-usual stares, Then the pointed questions. "You're a fast learner. Did you practice somewhere?" Rachel just shook her head. "I only learned here." But while the rest of the class struggled with basic techniques, Rachel moved like someone who had lived on the mat for years, and that made Blake feel threatened. Blake had seen this once before, a female grappler years ago, smaller than everyone, but she outperformed half his class. She earned respect Blake never got. Since then, any woman who showed promise, it made him tense. During practice that day, Rachel gently adjusted the posture of a struggling girl. No loud voice, no airs, just a short instruction. Blake saw it, and he didn't miss it. "If you think you're better than me, Rachel, maybe you should teach this class," he said loudly, making sure the whole class could hear. The air fell silent. Rachel stepped back, bowing her head slightly. "I'm sorry." But the apology only made Blake angrier. To him, she had just broken an unwritten rule: no stepping over the hierarchy. No appearing more dangerous than the person in charge. From that day on, Blake began to notice her more often. Every wrong move, no matter how small, was publicly called out. Every word he said had an implication, aimed at someone, and everyone knew that person was Rachel. Since the day Rachel crossed the line, the atmosphere in the class changed. Blake started targeting her in every practice session. "This is a classic example of learning too fast without understanding the basics," he said as he forced Rachel to hold the wrong locking position for nearly a minute, even though everyone could see she was doing it correctly. The class chuckled. A few students glanced at each other. Some began to avoid contact with Rachel, afraid of being involved. She didn't react. No argument, no explanation. But one evening in the locker room, Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water bottle. She stared at them in silence. She just kept practicing, steadily, coldly, as if the physical pain wasn't enough to make her stop. In the Army, she had suffered worse than this. But Apex isn't a battlefield. It's a test of something else: patience, discipline, and the ultimate limits of endurance. That week, Rachel was unexpectedly invited to take an advanced class, something that had never happened before. She knew this was no honor. This was an invitation from a trap. During practice, Blake called her out to the middle of the floor in front of nearly 30 students. "I will demonstrate defensive techniques against a larger, stronger opponent." His voice was calm, but his eyes were cold as a knife. No warning, no preparation. Blake suddenly swept Rachel's leg with unusual force. She fell heavily to the carpet, her back hitting the floor loudly, causing the room to pause for a second, and then burst into laughter. "This isn't ballet class," he said. "Some people don't belong here." A few phones were raised, back, and Rachel. She sat up quietly, her eyes not angry, but frighteningly calm. When the laughter died down, Rachel stood up slowly. She bowed formally. "Thanks for the illustration, sir." Her voice was strangely gentle, without a trace of bitterness. The dog tag around her neck had slipped off her collar, the metal glinting faintly under the practice lights. Blake saw it and frowned. She stepped back in line and continued practicing with the class. Her face was expressionless, but each movement was sharp and terrifying. When it was their turn to split into groups to practice, Blake deliberately made her sit outside in front of the whole class. "Sit down and observe, you might learn something." Rachel didn't protest. She sat still, her back straight, her eyes following every movement on the floor. She didn't need to speak, because in battle the best observer is often the one who strikes the last blow. After practice, when everyone had gone to the locker room, Blake returned holding a spray bottle and a towel. "The carpet is dirty. If you're not going to use it properly, at least keep it clean." He threw his things at Rachel's feet and walked away without looking back. Rachel said nothing. She knelt down on the carpet and began wiping each square, her hand steady, her eyes unwavering. She had wiped the blood of her comrades off the floor of a helicopter before. This was nothing. At that moment, from the second-floor window, a salt-and-pepper-haired man stood silently in the darkness of the office. Maxwell Reed, the owner of Apex, didn't say a word, but his eyes followed Rachel for a long time, not out of pity, but because He just realized that woman was unlike any student he had ever seen. "Rachel, is it? Can you come into my room for a moment?" Maxwell Reed, a man with salt and pepper hair and eyes that looked like they were weighing profits, called her back. Rachel pushed the towel aside, stood up, and walked into the quiet office. He sat down in the leather chair, arms crossed. "I've been monitoring your progress. Blake has some concerns. That you might not fit in with our environment." She didn't answer, just looked straight ahead. Maxwell tapped his fingers on the table. "We have a girls' class for beginners Tuesday and Thursday mornings. You'll feel more comfortable there." With all due respect, Rachel replied, her voice even and unwavering. "I signed up for the advanced class, and I will continue to take it." Maxwell raised an eyebrow. No one would have turned him down like that. But Rachel? Not anyone. Maxwell did not argue. He opened a drawer and placed a sheet of paper and a pen on the table. The next week, Rachel walked into class as usual, but not as normal anymore. On the bulletin board at the entrance, a screenshot from the video of her fall with the text, "Technique gone wrong." Students passed by laughing softly. No one dared to take it down. When she walked over to a group to pair up for practice, they immediately spread out as if by reflex. "Excuse me, we need someone who can cooperate." A male student's voice rang out deliberately loud enough. Her bag was moved by someone to the bathroom door. Throughout the practice session, Blake continued to call Rachel's name, but only to illustrate the mistake. This is a perfect example of learning without understanding. There was no doubt about it. She had become the target, and the real test had just begun. "I understand, but there is one more thing. From next month, advanced class students will have to pay an additional $60 coaching support fee. No prior notice." Clearly a blow to financial viability. Rachel glanced at the paper, a media release form allowing the academy to use the student's image for promotional purposes. She knew right away the video of the fall the other day would be used to drive engagement. She took the pen and signed without hesitation. "The new fee will be charged next month, right?" Maxwell nodded, a little surprised by her calm demeanor. No complaints, no concessions. There was only silence, as if she was waiting for someone else to finish their song first. The next week, Rachel walked into class as usual, but not as normal anymore. On the bulletin board at the entrance, a screenshot from the video of her fall with the text, "Technique gone wrong." Students passed by laughing softly. No one dared to take it down. When she walked over to a group to pair up for practice, they immediately spread out as if by reflex. "Excuse me, we need someone who can cooperate." A male student's voice rang out deliberately loud enough. Her bag was moved by someone to the bathroom door. Throughout the practice session, Blake continued to call Rachel's name, but only to illustrate the mistake. This is a perfect example of learning without understanding. There was no doubt about it. She had become the target, and the real test had just begun. First, the video. A 10-second clip cut from Blake's demonstration session went viral on social media in local Jiu-Jitsu circles. Note: when Yoga Mom tries grappling lock, accompanied by smiley faces and dozens of sarcastic comments. Not long after a former patient of Rachel's at the rehab center suddenly asked to change therapists. No reason. She overheard a sentence from the reception desk. He said, he saw the video and didn't feel comfortable. Even the coffee shop near her house, where she often went, had 2 Apex students whispering in front of her. Blake said she was a prime example of trying too hard and not being good enough. Rachel just stood there, her hands clasping her coffee cup. People don't need to hit you with their fists. Sometimes a look is enough. One afternoon at the rehabilitation center, Rachel meets Master Sergeant James Wilson, a former combat instructor who is recovering from a knee injury. He looked at her for a long moment, not like a patient looking at a doctor, but like a soldier looking at a soldier. "You were a combat instructor at Camp Pendleton, right?" Rachel paused. She had never told anyone here. Wilson nodded without needing confirmation. His eyes had watched the way she walked weight on mid-heel, no wasted motion. How she turned to the left while shielding her right shoulder signs only a trained fighter would catch. Don't let the kids make you forget who you are. I have a small group. We practice at the Dorchester Community Center every week. No banners, no live streams. Just real practice. That evening, after her shift, Rachel quietly walked into the empty gym, no logo, no mirror. There was only the old floor, the yellow light, and the first person to call her by name, in a soldier's way. There are no shiny weight racks or digital timers at the Dorchester. Just faded exercise mats, duct tape on the walls, and an old Bluetooth speaker that blares a metronome. Rachel starts from scratch, but unlike Apex, there's no judgment here. Wilson did not hold back. You're not here to recover mentally. You're here to remember who you used to be. Sweeps, arm locks, redirections, close-ups. Rachel gradually remembered her breathing, her body's center of gravity, and how to deal with opponents not with strength, but with strategy. Old muscles are not gone. Old discipline remains. You're trying to hide in Apex, Wilson observed, but sooner or later you'll have to show them who you are. Rachel didn't reply, but her eyes changed. It began to sharpen again, like a knife blade being sharpened after being hidden for a while. At Apex, Rachel still showed up regularly, on time, on schedule, but deliberately made slight mistakes in every move. When Blake gestured for her to adjust her posture, she nodded, feigning confusion. Still, don't get it. Practicing like this won't get you anywhere. His voice was as flat as a news report, cold and bored. She accepted. No arguments, no corrections, no more correctness than necessary, because the weaker they appear, the more subjective they become. That evening, Rachel returned to Dorchester a different person. Move flexibly. React quickly, handle situations as if the brain and body were one unified entity. Wilson watched, nodding. True victory is not in striking the hardest blow, but in making your opponent never know you have struck. And Rachel, learning to wait for the right moment. One Monday morning, the Apex Bulletin Board posted a poster, Boston Open Jiu-Jitsu Tournament. Register by the 10th. Blake walked by, clapping his hands loudly. Whoever is qualified, please register. Whoever is not qualified, do not embarrass the academy. Rachel stared at the poster for a long time. That night, she sent in her application form. Women's blue belt. Even at Apex, she is still only ranked as a white belt. Wilson is the guarantor, using the authority of a former senior coach to attest to her actual abilities. The next morning, in front of the entire class, Blake held up the application form. Rachel Monroe just signed up to compete under Apex, but I never approved that. He tore the paper in front of everyone. A few students clapped softly. Rachel kept her face calm, registration fee paid, tournament accepted, and I have a valid guarantee. Blake paused. Guarantee from whom? Master Sergeant James Wilson, former Marine Corps close combat instructor. You can check. The whole class fell silent. A few eyes began to waver. Blake clasped his hands and said softly but firmly, You are embarrassing yourself in public. Rachel bowed her head slightly. I have been in the middle of a battlefield. I am not afraid of the ring. A week before the tournament, Apex began its strategy meeting. Rachel was not invited. The list of competitors printed on the board, her name was crossed out, replaced by a small note, no official representation. As she approached the tactical group, Claire, the female student who had mocked her, stood in her way. This part is for the official team, Rachel. She nodded, stepped back, and said nothing. But, in his eyes, there was no longer disappointment, just confirmation of something he already knew. During the final rehearsals, Blake ignored her completely, giving no assignments or instructions. She warmed up by herself, sparring with the punching bag. No one came near. Apex has a team, but Rachel is alone. And sometimes, a lone warrior is the only one free enough to win. Early the morning of the competition, Rachel arrived at the convention center in a pure white gi, no logo, no academy name tag. Apex gathered as a group, matching shoes, branded jackets, lively chatter. Rachel stood a few meters away, warming up alone, focusing on each breath. Claire walked by and threw out a sentence that was as solid as a nail. "You should stay in the stands. Blake doesn't want you embarrassing the team." Rachel didn't answer, but in the distance, a man in an old sand-colored coat was watching. Master Sergeant Wilson. He didn't wave or call out, just nodded. And for Rachel, that nod had a whole team behind her, because she doesn't need a team shirt. She has values and discipline in her blood. The loudspeaker blared in the middle of the stadium, notice to all competitors. A replacement spot has opened up in the men's black belt middleweight division due to an injury withdrawal. The person called in order of review, Rachel Monroe. The whole arena was silent for a moment. Blake turned to the referee's table and shouted, "She's a white belt. She's a woman. She can't qualify the referee." A woman in her 60s with a lot of experience placed the confirmation on the table. "Guarantee by Master Sergeant James Wilson. Verified by us. Professionally qualified." Blake stuttered, his eyes twitching. "No. No way." The referee looked at him coldly. "If you have a formal complaint, file it. If not, get ready to hit the mat. Her first opponent is you." Blake stood on the stage, his face stony. There was no laughter, no arrogance, just a kind of awkward silence. Rachel removed her jacket, revealing lean but toned arms with old scars no one in Apex had ever seen. The Apex students who had been laughing at her began to whisper, backing away. What was she? Why doesn't anyone know about this? Blake took a deep breath, trying to regain control. They bowed to the referee. Rachel and Blake's eyes met. No longer student and teacher, but warriors. The referee raised his hand. "Ready. Fight." The whistle blew, and fate began to count down, second by second. The whistle blew, and fate began to count down, second by second. Blake charged forward as always, fast, strong, overwhelming. Rachel didn't back away, just leaned slightly, dodging at the right angle. Her left hand pulled his wrist in a perfect sleeve drag. Her right hand rotated, applying precise pressure to his elbow. He lost his balance for just half a breath. Rachel slid over his hips like water, transitioning into a full armbar in just 3 moves. Arm locked. No way out. Blake struggled, his face red. Then he slammed his hands on the floor. Tap. A resounding clap. The referee shouted, "Stop!" The clock shows 0:14. The audience was silent. No one applauded. No one spoke. Blake sat up, staggering, his eyes blank. In his head, she didn't just beat me. I never deserved to teach her. And Rachel, she stood up, bowed as quietly as if nothing special had happened. She just took out Blake. In 14 seconds. A whisper rose from the audience. Then a second, a third. The video was filmed from 3 angles and immediately went viral among local martial arts groups. First comment, "Who is this woman?" Second comment, "Why did Blake let her hide her skills all this time?" On Apex's internal forums, students began to question. Why are the best treated like the worst students? Blake is afraid she is better. Maxwell Reed received a series of emails from parents and the Academy's Board of Supervisors. A wave has been created, and this time no one can drown it out with silence. After the victory, Rachel did not celebrate, did not take pictures, and did not stay in the competition area. She bowed to the referee, bowed to Blake, even though he was facing away, and left the ring as if she had just finished warming up for a practice session. Claire and a few of the Apex students looked on, no longer mocking, just confused. In the break room, she took off her gloves and neatly packed the G in her bag. She glanced up at the mirror. For a second, the fluorescent light flickered, and she saw herself as she was on her first day, hunched, silent, eyes down. Now her back was straight, calm, whole. Online. The video started to spread, the 14-second submission. The woman Apex tried to erase. She doesn't respond to interviews. She doesn't write statuses. She doesn't post anything online. Just send a message to Wilson Dunn, heading home. Then put on your hat and leave the competition center. Because for Rachel, the goal was never about winning. It was about closing a circle. On Monday morning, the Apex reception room was flooded with emails and messages. I don't want my child to learn under someone like Blake. Why has she been treated like this all this time? Maxwell Reed, who is good at directing public opinion, was silent this time. The Academy's board of directors convened an emergency meeting. An anonymous complaint was filed listing 6 instances of female students being publicly insulted or humiliated by Blake. In there's also audio evidence. Blake was temporarily suspended from teaching the internal notice read pending internal investigation and community feedback. But the fact is, everyone knows the knockout really happened. And for the first time in years, Blake had no one to defend him. On Thursday afternoon, Rachel received an email from Apex. Mr. Reed would like to talk to you about a long-term partnership opportunity. She came, not out of curiosity, but out of respect. Maxwell's office was tidier now. His eyes, too, were softer. Rachel, we were wrong. Blake has damaged the core values that Apex pursues. She didn't answer. Wait for the real part. We would like to offer you a position as a female self-defense instructor and program advisor, with full authority to design the curriculum. He smiled. Your reputation is very attractive. Rachel tilted her head. Because I was humiliated, then won back. Maxwell hesitated. Rachel stood up gently. I'm not going back to cover up past mistakes. I'm building a place where there's no need to hide from anyone. A week later, in a small room behind the Veterans Rehabilitation Center, Rachel cleaned up the last piece of rubber flooring. No logo, no billboard. Just a handwritten sign, Combat Recovery Class. For those who have been knocked down but have not given up. Within 48 hours of sending the internal email, the sign-up list was full. The first 2 students were female veterans with PTSD who had never set foot in a gym for fear of being looked down upon. After the first class, someone hugged her choking. She didn't just teach me how to defend myself, she taught me how to stop hating myself. Rachel nodded, squeezing her shoulder. This was her arena, and this time no one was left out. After 3 weeks, Rachel's class was full. Neurotherapists, social workers, and psychologists began asking to sit in to understand why people who had previously refused treatment opened up in her studio. A local newspaper published an article from Victim to Coach Woman Teaches Body Control Back to Trauma Survivor. A martial arts academy in another state invited Rachel to give a lecture on martial arts for mental health recovery. She doesn't talk much about the past, but when students ask about the 14-second shot, she just smiles. It's not a special move. It's a normal technique that's been practiced very well, and it is that normality that can save those who were once considered abnormal. On Tuesday afternoon, class was about to start when the door opened. Claire Hare, tied-back dark hoodie, stood in the doorway like a stranger. She had been standing outside for 3 sessions, unable to step in. Today, she did. Rachel stopped, her eyes widening. Claire walked slowly, her voice soft but clear. I didn't come to practice. I came to apologize. Silence filled the room. What I said at Apex, there is no excuse. I was wrong, and I know it. Rachel nodded slightly. There was no harshness in her expression, just the silence of someone who had gone beyond anger. Claire took a breath. If you agree, I want to help, even if it's just cleaning the carpet, making drinks, anything. Rachel looked deep into her eyes. Helping here means understanding that other people's pain is not something to be ridiculed. Claire nodded. I understand, and I want to start over. Rachel didn't answer right away. She put her hand on Claire's shoulder. Not hard, not light, just enough to hold her gaze. This is not a place to pay back debts. This is a place to be together. Claire nodded, choking. Rachel turned to point to an empty corner of the carpet. Make everyone some drinks. Then sit back and watch. When you're ready, you'll know. From that day on, Claire was a regular. She didn't practice, didn't say much, just watched, listened, and helped with little things. A week later, when a new female student arrived, her eyes anxious, her body tense with trauma. Rachel signaled, "Claire, can you show her around with some light warm-ups?" Claire paused, then nodded. As she turned away, her eyes filled with tears. Because for the first time, she didn't have to ask for permission to stand on the carpet. She was trusted. After just 3 months, Rachel's class waiting list exceeded 40 people. A veterans support organization offered to donate new space at the Roxbury Community Center, along with mats, mirrors, and basic tools. Next up was a local library, which wanted to open a weekend class for women who had survived domestic violence. Rachel doesn't promote anything. It's all spread by people who have stepped out of the shadows carrying the real story. Wilson, who had been her silent mentor, was now a full-time teaching assistant. Claire became the coordinator calling registering leading kickoffs. Rachel walked into the first class at the third facility looking at the students concentrating on deep breathing. No noise, no flashy slogans. There was only the sound of breathing, and the quiet belief that I could be strong again. One early fall morning, Rachel drove across the Massachusetts border into Pennsylvania. The military cemetery was quiet with rows of white headstones. She went to the grave of Staff Sergeant Robert Monroe, her father, the soldier who had taught her the 3 most important words: focus, discipline, purpose. She placed a small stone on the tombstone as is tradition, and then quietly pulled from her pocket a photo of her first class with a handwritten note: "They're healing, Dad. Just like you did. Just like I am. No flowers, no tears, just the sound of the wind blowing through the grass." And in that moment, Rachel knew she was right back where she started, but not the same person. One Saturday morning, Rachel stopped by her usual coffee shop near the Dorchester Community Center. She ordered black coffee and waited. When she turned back, Blake was standing behind her. No more ghee shirt, no more haughty eyes. Just a tired man with eyes that could not hide the bitterness. He spoke, his voice hoarse. "You made me lose everything." Rachel looked straight at him calmly. "I didn't take anything from you. I just stopped bowing." Blake tightened his grip on his bag, not arguing. She paid, picked up her coffee cup, and walked past him. "If you had asked, I would have told you who I was. But you never wanted to know. And so the final confrontation doesn't need anyone to lose. Only one person has moved on." Email from National Trauma Recovery Alliance. "We are pleased to invite Rachel Monroe to speak at our annual conference on recovery through movement." For the first time, she saw her name alongside those of leading scholars, doctors, and experts. But she didn't feel like she belonged, just someone who had been told she didn't belong. At the conference, when she stepped up to the podium, she used no slides, no figures, no technical lists. There's only one opening sentence: "I am not a doctor. I was a soldier. I was a patient. And now I am a gatekeeper for those who need a way out." The audience fell silent. Not out of doubt, but because they listened with their own experience. Because what Rachel shares isn't in the textbook. It's in their own unhealed scars. When Rachel left the podium, there was no loud applause. Just the eyes that stood up followed her one by one silently. A geriatrician said softly, "My patient, a 74-year-old woman, was abused and never dared to speak out. But after watching your class clip, she volunteered to join." A young man, voice trembling, "I almost ended it all, but now I know. I have the power to be weak and the power to be strong again." Then came a silver-haired woman, a representative from the VA National Wellness Initiative. "We want you to advise on national program development, bringing your model to hundreds of centers." Rachel did not answer immediately. She just looked around, seeing familiar eyes, eyes that used to be her own, waiting to be led out of the darkness. That evening, Rachel returned to the Dorchester gym, a place that had once been filled with just a few people, a few mats, and heavy silence. The class was packed now. Claire was leading the warm-up, and Wilson stood at the back, arms crossed over his chest. Rachel waved everyone closer. I just accepted an invitation to advise a national program. To replicate this model. The class was stunned. A few people laughed happily. But Rachel raised her hand, her voice low. I didn't accept it to gain fame, but because I believe. Anyone who has ever fallen deserves a place like this. She looked around, her eyes stopping at each person, and this place, small as it is where it all began. Not in Washington, but in the steps you take every day. Rachel Monroe never sought the limelight. She just wanted a place where she didn't have to explain her past, where her present wasn't judged, and where she didn't have to ask for permission to be strong. That 14-second win. Yeah, it changed everything. But what she's really remembered for, it's how she gets up after being humiliated. It was the way she silently practiced in the dark. It's her way of giving others a new chance, even those who have hurt her. And maybe that's the opportunity you need. If you ever feel overlooked, left out, or misjudged, comment, "I'm still getting up." Because who knows? Your story might be the next inspiration.